Ladies and gentlemen, it's Saturday, it's Scotland, it's 1 p.m, and we're back in original form, the legible, credible, inevitable storm, which is A Force for Good's Saturday street stall, coming to you live from our nerve centre here in the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConaughey. And this is the place where we're sticking it to the Nats daily, weekly, monthly and yearly until we get these Scot Nats to see clearly that we're down with the capital A to the double FG, a force for good. It's the place where we've got it all figured out and there ain't no worries that we're worried about. And there's an awful lot to talk about in this, our 16th virtual Saturday street stall. And that's just shows the value of stick-to-itiveness. Stick-to-itiveness. If you keep doing something on a regular basis, it really mounts up and you really begin to produce a great catalogue of work. And we've been doing this now for 16 weeks and we have got no intention of stopping every Saturday. Sometimes it will be from our office here, sometimes it will be on a special assignment, and sometimes it will be on an actual live real street stall out in our great British city of Glasgow or the surrounds. And if you'd like to join us on one of those street stalls, please just say and we'll get in contact with you and you can come and join us. Donnie is giving us a wave back there to Donnie and a wave back to Nancy. Thanks for coming in. Now, got a lot to get through this week as always. We are going to start with the COVID Carry On Pantomime as we do every week. The COVID Carry On Pantomime continues and there's no real sign of it stopping, because it's now gone political. It's not about a pandemic, it's about politics. And it's almost gone into the realm where it's really no longer about science, it's almost into superstition. Ewan is watching, give you a wave, Jack, wave back. Tommy, good to see you again, watching as always. Hope you're doing well, Tommy. Now, you know, we're always researching, always trying to find stuff that summarises things and summarises the problem that we are facing at the moment. And we came across a really good article that was from the American Institute of Economic Research, which is a Ludwig von Mises body. He was a famous economist. We're not saying we agree with everything that he came out with, but sometimes you can get good stuff from their organisation. And there was a fantastic article written this week by a Jeffrey A. Tucker, who seems to be in charge of that particular organisation. And he summarised what's going on so well. Alan, thanks for waving. I just saw, I missed that comment on Twitter. I'll read it out if I get a chance. Now, what he said basically is, and he was talking about America, of course, he was saying that in the weeks and months since then, and he's referring to the New York Times, which really sets the political agenda for much of America, and certainly for the intelligentsia, so-called, of America, or those who fancy themselves to be the intelligentsia. And that's obviously out of New York. But lately, well, for a very long time, it's actually disgraced itself as a newspaper. There, thank you for putting that up. There's the article there. The New York Times revives its grim past. And its grim past was, it's, according to the author here, the suppression of a lot of the Soviet crimes back in the 1930s. But now what he's saying is that it's now producing another false narrative about COVID. And he sums it up like that. In the weeks and months since then, the paper's coronavirus doctrine was set in stone. It goes like this. And this is exactly what's happening in the United Kingdom, in our media. This is a terrifying pandemic. Many millions will die. Everyone is vulnerable. The only solution is to lock down. If we don't lock down, it is Trump's fault. Or in the UK, you could say Boris Johnson's fault. Therefore, Trump is responsible for all death. And that message has been repeated thousands of times every day, in every way, ever since. And that's the essential message that our mainstream media is working from as well, that this is a terrible pandemic, that unless the lockdown is severe, unless we're all walking about with masks, millions are going to die, and if they die, it's that person's fault. It's that president or it's that prime minister to blame. And that's essentially Nicola Sturgeon's view of it as well. I'll get to that question in a minute that's just come in there. So that's how they look at it. And he further summarised it so well. He says, the pattern, therefore, at the New York Times, and we can say by the mainstream media, follows this. Attribute terrible economic fallout not to the lockdown, but to the virus. Attribute virus fallout to the failure to not lock down enough. Deliberately confuse readers and watchers about the difference between tests and cases and deaths. Never focus on the incredibly obvious demographics of the COVID death place, which is average age 82 with underlying conditions. Never focus on that. Ignore completely the primary victims of lockdowns, especially small businesses, the poor, the marginalised communities, small towns, small theatres, etc. Do not publish anything that speaks of the path that all civilised countries dealt with new viruses, which was largely leaving it to the natural human immune system to deal with. And dismiss any alternative lockdown theory as crazy, unscientific, and especially cruel. And above all, promote panic over calm. And that is the playbook by which the mainstream media in America and the United Kingdom is working by. And that was written by Jeffrey Tucker in the New York Times Revives Its Grim Past. And we've put the link there in the Facebook thread, and we'll put it into the description at a later date as well. So that's the constant panic that we are being forced to. Now, I'd like to know, how are your cities where you live and how are your towns coping now with this renewed situation where we're able to get out, where hairdressers have opened, where pubs have opened, where shops are opening but requiring you to wear a mask? How is that going down in your high street? I'd like to know. Trevor, give you a wave back there. So how is that going down? Because here in Glasgow, it's not really taking off yet. I passed two hairdressers yesterday. One was a woman's one was a man's one, and they were empty. Okay, empty hairdressers. And this isn't even, and this is when you would expect it would be busy, and it's usually normally both of these hairdressers are packed out. Just like in normal situations, these hairdressers are packed out. But now they had actually nobody in their shop. And this was like peak afternoon time. So I'm wondering just how successful this opening up is going to be, considering that so much panic has been induced by not just the Scottish administration, but by Boris and indeed throughout the world. And there's really no need for it, because as I just read to you there, the average demographic to suffer, unfortunately, are very elderly people with underlying conditions. So, any thoughts on that? Give Martin back a wave. Politically, it's been very busy this week, with powers coming back from the European Union, and that's something, of course, that us Brexiteers have wanted for a long time. There's a lot of powers coming back. Somebody saying the North Wales town where I am is 50-50 wearing masks. 50% wearing, 50% not. That's probably what I'm noticing as well. I spoke to a security guard outside Asda, and what they said is that they're not going to enforce the law, because it's not their job to enforce the law. What So you can go in and you can shop without a mask if you want in these big supermarkets. However, they did say to me, it is the law that you have to wear a mask. So if a police officer came in and saw you, then you would have to answer to him or her. And somebody's saying, yeah, the messages are all confused. Is it 1 meter? Is it 2 meter? It's exactly confused, and it's inevitable. It's inevitable. If you created this panic, how do you get back down again? That Jeffrey A. Tucker, by the way, has written another good article on that site called The Madness of Crowds, and he shows how crowds can lose their head very quickly, and it takes a very long while for them to regain their heads again, and they have to do it one at a time. People can be divested of their heads en masse, but to regain their head, they do it one at a time. So it could be a long stretch, this crazy situation that we're in. Going to talk about the Scottish hate speech bill coming up soon, sir. Somebody just asked a question about that, because we are making an official submission to the Scottish administration about that this week. Give a wave there to those folks who are watching. Please give us a wave in as well. So this week all these powers came back, and what you got, of course, in Westminster was the very few SNP people who were there making a big deal about some of the powers not going back to Holyrood, because they said all the powers should go back to Holyrood. And why should they be saying that? Well, the reason they're saying that is because when devolution was first constructed by the Labour Party back in the late 90s, they made the very worst move they could possibly do. They said that all powers would be devolved. Everything was devolved, except that which was written down as reserved to the British Parliament. So what that meant is that all powers, even powers that you had forgotten about, powers that didn't exist yet because they might be powers over something that we don't know about yet, or powers that were suddenly coming in from elsewhere, such as these returning powers, all powers would be automatically devolved, except that which was written down. Now, if you want to hold a state together, that is the very worst form of opposition the very worst form of devolution that you can do, because you've essentially just given up all the powers, except that which you've remembered to write down. The correct way of holding a unitary state together is to ensure that you only devolve that which you write down, and everything else is considered reserved. There has to be a presumption that everything is reserved, except that which you've written down as devolved. That's the correct way to hold a state together. Of course, it was not the way that the Labour Party set up devolution. They set it up the opposite to that, which was, we're giving away everything, except that which we remember to write down. And that's what's called the devolution settlement. And we at Force for Good have long argued that that devolution settlement is the wrong way round, and it's upside down, and it needs to be reversed. Now, that's a big ask, but it's what needs to happen if the UK is to hold together. And if it doesn't actually happen on paper, there has to be an ongoing presumption from here on in that that's the way it's going to have to work if the UK is to be held together. And we've written an article about that, which is on our website. And I think please do check it out. Put the link up there, somebody, please. It's called Time to Change the Devolution Settlement. And what I've just said there is what's written down here. And if you're a politician, or if you're in the British Cabinet, whatever, and you're watching this, then please take this on board, because that's so relevant to what has happened and what has gone wrong with our devolution. Is the devolution settlement is the wrong way round. Somebody's saying there most people in that person's home are still staying at home. Somebody's saying during the week on my way home, 5 people with no masks were drinking freely from what looked like the glasses from the pub. Oh well. Back to the good old days. Somebody saying there on Twitter, we must keep all powers which affect the UK. We must keep all powers centralised. That's absolutely correct. Bill saying very true. Thanks. Yeah, so on these powers, okay, and it just shows you how the SNP want to mess up things. These returning powers, they actually said that all of them should be coming to Scotland. Now, technically they're right from their reading of the devolution settlement. But of course, in reality, we can't have that. We cannot have that, because what it would mean is that powers over setting food standards, for example, or powers over setting various regulations over business would go back to the Scottish Parliament. And being the SNP, they would change them in such a way that they would be different from England, which would mean that it would be very hard for businesses in Scotland and England to trade with each other, because you'd have to go through all these different rules and regulations. And food in England couldn't cross the border because Nicola Sturgeon would have set up some law that against that kind of food unless it had been produced in such a way, and so on. So it would totally destroy the internal market if you gave those sorts of powers straight back to Holyrood. Now, what has happened is that thankfully they've been kept at the British Parliament, where they have to be kept in order that the British Parliament can ensure a consistent internal market with consistent rules and regulations in order to allow proper trade to go on. And that's one of the reasons why we had the Union in 1707. It was to regulate the standards so that there would be free and easy trade across the so-called border. And that is a crucial part of the Union. And if you were to give up that in the name of devolution, then you would essentially have destroyed the economic union that we have. And so that's a vital power that has to stay with the British Parliament, and they need to make that clear. And they've been trying to do that. There was an article by a chap who's the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy a few days ago in the Daily Mail, saying what I've just basically said to you: from food production and labelling to the parts used in manufacturing and engineering, the idea of businesses having to adapt to different regulations across the UK is completely unthinkable. Completely unthinkable. Scotland's prosperity relies on the fact that there are no barriers to making widgets in Lanarkshire and selling them a couple of 100 miles down the motorway in Lancashire. We are so accustomed to seamless trade within the UK that we tend to take it for granted. And that is so true. And we cannot be giving the Scottish Nationalists powers over those sorts of regulations. Well, somebody's saying we need an English Parliament. Well, that would destroy the United Kingdom. An English Parliament would be so powerful. The Scotland and everybody would just have to pull away from it, because it would dominate the islands to such an extent. And that was also one of the reasons why the Scots wanted to join with a British Parliament back in 1707, because the English Parliament was too powerful for the islands. It would just have become like the whole place would just have become like a Greater England. So we had to have a British Parliament in order to give the smaller parts a little bit more say and power over what the big elephant in the room was saying and doing. And that's still the function of the British Parliament today. But an English Parliament would be the end of the United Kingdom. We could all just give up, basically, because there's no way Scotland could deal with that. But well, yes, a sort of UK common market is what we have, but we don't refer to it in that way. It's really just the British internal market is the way that we see it. May saying something that many people say: we need the SNP out before they totally ruin Scotland. Well, let's hope that we can somehow reduce their power, and for that we depend upon the British Parliament, who are our last hope. You know, they are the ones with the power to put Nicola Sturgeon in her place. Somebody saying there, Richard's got put in an article from our legacy site. These are the fundamental starting principles. We are a unitary state. That's good. We wrote about 31st principles of the United Kingdom, and Richard there has put up the link to that. Thanks very much. I had omitted to. I had forgotten momentarily about that article, which was also a speech that we wrote. And Christopher saying an English Parliament would be a gift to the SNP. Of course, of course. And you know what? That brings us on nicely to the next point that we want to make. There was 2 or 3 articles this week saying that opinion polls were saying. So we don't really believe opinion polls, because opinion polls don't so much reflect public opinion as deliberately guide it in a certain way. Because opinion polling is a black art. It's not like, what's the opposite of a black art? A white art? It's not like a good thing. Opinion polls are done in order politically to move things in various directions. And with an opinion poll, you can start from the most absurd premise and ask a person a question about it, and they will then have an opinion about it. So it's like you'll start off just like, what could we say? Do you think that people should live half their life in a wheelie bin? And 2% of the population will say yes, because that's a joke. And before you know it, it'll be like 2% of the population, and then they'll push that, and next week it'll be 5% of the population, and so on and so forth. And before you know it, we'll all be living in wheelie bins, because that's where the opinion polls have led us to. So, opinion polls are a black art. Don't believe them. Always question the premises, but sometimes they're interesting to read. And there was one this week that said something like a majority of English Tories wanted to leave the Union. Now, that's like living in a wheelie bin, because that's what you're going to end up doing if you leave the Union. If you're an English Tory living in a big grand house down in the home counties, believe me, if the Union collapsed, you're going to end up in a wheelie bin. You need to know that, okay? Because that's just an absurd thing to think. How can anybody who considers themselves even British, or who wants Britain to leave the EU, how can you then say you want Britain to break up? There's no rhyme or reason to that. So we have to presume that people who were asked that question didn't have a clue about politics and didn't really understand where they were coming from anyway. But we understand that. We understand that not everybody is as politically astute as people at A Force for Good are, and that's why we run our organisation here, to educate people. But really, you cannot believe in and believe that it should be broken up, okay? You can't do that. It makes no sense whatsoever. It says you don't believe in Britain, and we don't believe that. We don't believe there's a majority of English people or whatever who want to break up Britain. And how do we appeal to those people, though? How do we appeal to them? Well, several years ago, we gave a speech, 21 reasons why England should care about Scotland separating. And we listed things that if you were just looking at it from a specifically English perspective, maybe these would convince you that the Union is quite important, and that in fact an England without a Scotland is, well, it's a Britain without a head, basically. It would be back to where we were pre-1603, basically, pre the Union of the Crowns, because when James VI, who designed this wonderful Union Jack flag, he could see the problems of the split economy, the split internal market, and he could see the constant fighting and problems that could be breaking out. So he wanted to unify the United Kingdom in the person of his being. And he was way before his time. He was 104 years before his time. But he set in wheels the idea of union throughout the United Kingdom. And that's why we venerate James VI as one of our great founding fathers. You know, the Americans have their founding fathers, and we have them as well. And I'll talk about that in a moment, about the importance of Britain's founding fathers. English media is spreading the SNP propaganda. Paul, that's such an important point. And I think that what we see often is the BBC, and I used to like the BBC. I grew up with the BBC, children's BBC programming. I grew up with that. I had a soft spot in my heart for the BBC. But what we're seeing today with the BBC is it's almost like they see the SNP, they see them as a divisive force, and for some twisted reason, they want to promote them. You know, that's why they're not going to have Alistair McConaughey on British broadcasting. Alistair, what's your message? Well, my message is, let's work together, every boy, girl, woman and a man, and let's make this a better country. They'll be like, no, that's really off message. You know, couldn't you say something bad? Like, how about, like, you want to take more money from the English or something? And I'd be like, no. And it's like, that's why we're never going to get on. So you only get on to BBC or Scottish National Party Television, otherwise known as STV, if you are trying to split things in half, you know, because they just want that drama. And it might just be for views, or it might just be inherent badness. I don't really know, but it's not good. It's not good. So, yeah, what can we say is, like, to those people in England who want to stay, good for you, and you support us up here, support a force for good. But just remember this: those of you who think that somehow if Scotland was independent, you'd never see Nicola Sturgeon on the telly again. Oh no. You see, we're joined in an island, which means Scotland is not going away. So the people who whine about England today will whine about England forevermore. And they will always complain. And even if you give them independence, as we said last week, you can give them anything and they will take it without thanks, they will bank it, and they will pretend that they never received it. So even if somehow, which they won't, but even if they got their independence, they would go, it's not real independence. No, it's not real independence because we're still using the British currency, or we've still got Trident, or it's not real independence because for whatever mucked up reason, they won't even accept it when they get independence. And we know that. They'll complain. And imagine the divorce settlement, the terms of it. Imagine the whining and complaining about that that's going to be on your news in London for the next 50 years. Okay, so independence will not stop the Scottish nationalists whining. It will, in fact, make it much worse because they will have so many new things now to whine about, to complain about, to gripe about. And we know this because I buy the National so that you don't have to, and I read their letters pages, and in the letters pages they're still complaining about the Union of 1707. They're still complaining about the terms of the Union in 1707. Over 313 years later, they're still complaining about the Union of 1707. So do you think you're going to get rest from their whining if Scotland was independent? No, they'll just whine and yap even more because that's the nature of the sort of people they are. You know, some people are glasses half full, some people the glass is half empty. And that's just the way that they go through life. And we are, obviously we're half full people, but Scottish nationalists are half empty people. They just see the pessimism and they see another opportunity to complain. And imagine, of course, if that would then lead to an English Parliament, which would be a very powerful force within the United Kingdom. And so instead of directing their attention at the British Parliament, which at least has got people from Ireland and Wales in it, it would just be this English Parliament. And that would just be boom, 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 forevermore. And everything that went wrong in Scotland would be blamed at the feet of England. And we would have, Scots, Unionists would have nobody in England speaking up for us and saying, no, that's all wrong. That's all wrong. There would be no forum, there would be no British Parliament for us to point out how wrong some of our compatriots here in Scotland are. So that's, I'm afraid that's just the way that it is. Independence, separation will not stop the Scottish nationalists from whining. The BBC is not English. That's true. They're not even British sometimes, the way that they act. Rich was saying you can give them the moon and fly them to there in Scotland and they'd still be whining. Yeah, even if they got the moon and even if you settled them there, which is actually not a bad idea to settle them on the moon. And maybe someday, if Donald Trump can get his space force going, we can maybe populate Mars. But no, so we need the people in England to be strong, to be strong for Britain, because we're relying upon you guys. You know, don't leave us, quite frankly. Don't leave us. And there's no United Kingdom without Scotland. It's Scotland and England, Wales and Northern Ireland together. That's where the rightness lies, the right direction lies. And yeah, so check out our speech, 21 Reasons Why England Should Care About Scotland Separating, and also our article, If You're British, You're Involved, which is on our new site, aforceforgood.uk. And if you like this flag, then please do check out our wee flag badge, which is selling very well. You can get that. Go to aforceforgood.uk, look along the top, click on shop, and you get a wee badge there. And we've also got our Union Heart badge, which is that design up there that says A Force for Good through the middle of it. And that's a really nice enamel badge that you can get as well. And some people buy several of these just to give to their children as well, because everybody loves it. Everybody loves it. Angelo says, move them to the moon. Yeah. So, what else this week? Boris Johnson has suggested this chap asking about George Galloway. Our position on George Galloway is that we don't have a position on George Galloway. He is a very good speaker for the Union, and he did a fantastic job back in 2014. And if he comes up here and he stirs things up for Nicola Sturgeon, that's all to the good. That's all to the good. So we'll leave him to do his thing. No doubt he'll leave us to do our thing. And we wish George Galloway the very best in whatever he does. But there's going to be an interesting lineup at next May's Scottish Holyrood election. And there'll be, no doubt, quite a few people to vote for. Whether he'll be one of them or not, I don't know. Give a wave there to another person that's coming in and watching. So yeah, this week Boris Johnson has suggested that the British Parliament should move to York while it is undergoing renovation. It's not going to be for 2 or 3 years yet, but we think that's a really, really good idea. And believe it or not, that's also one of our suggestions, at least moving the Parliament to somewhere else in the United Kingdom while the Palace of Westminster is being renovated. We made that suggestion, number 12 of our 23 policies to strengthen the Union, in our wee book for the Union. Now, our first edition sold out within 72 hours. So we have produced this second edition. 500 copies arrived in the office yesterday. And so please do get it, because if it sells out as quickly as the last one, then you've only got a window of a few days to get it. So that's a wee book for the Union. It's a 56-page, perfect bound pocket book. If Bruce Lee had written this, it would be the Kung Fu finger book of the Union, essentially. There's this idea that Bruce Lee wrote a secret book about his style that nobody's ever found, the Kung Fu finger book. Well, this is it in unionist form, okay? The Kung Fu finger book of unionism is called a wee book for the Union, which tells you, gives you lots of little good ideas in here, lots of good wee quotes, lots of good things to say to your mate, or to try to convince a friend, or to use down the pub. As we said last week, if you're looking for a book full of statistics, this is not it. This is really just a story about our Union from the depths of time, since it rose from out the azure main. This was the charter of the land, and guardian angels sang this strain. Roll Britannia, Britannia roll the waves. Britons never, never shall be slaves. And of course that gets a mention in our introduction, as does that fantastic quote here from James VI of Great Britain, the man who invented the Union Jack flag, the man from Dunfermline Palace. So please do go into that. please check out the link for the wee book, which somebody will put up in the comments there. But selling out very fast and very well. Susan says, please leave the MPs in London. Don't spoil beautiful York. I hear you. I know what you're saying. Maybe we could move them about. 2 or 3 years in York, 2 or 3 years in Birmingham, 2 or 3 years in Edinburgh. Why not? You know, the European Union has a parliament in Frankfurt, and they move to Brussels, and then they move back to Frankfurt. They have a rotating parliament. If they can do it, why can't we do it here in the United Kingdom? And if we can't do that, then maybe we can do what our policy suggestion here says, which is hold British cabinet meetings at devolved assemblies. And these could be once a year at Holyrood, Cardiff and Stormont, because these places already have the infrastructure and the security in place, and that would help to integrate those assemblies within the British Parliament in the public mind, rather than giving the impression that they are in opposition to each other. Richard's saying ideally they should get rid of Holyrood and Cardiff, or at least cut them down to size. I hear you as well, Richard, and I'm not going to argue with that policy, whether that's realistic or not. Time will tell. Time will tell. I know it's a growing theory in Unionist thought, is just abolish Holyrood. You know, abolish Holyrood. I know more people are just coming out and saying that, and they have this year after they've seen the fiasco that's been going on. Well, you know, we've got a busy week ahead, and 2 or 3 things that I want to talk to you about. The 24th, which is Friday, is the closing date for submissions to Humza Yousaf's hate speech law. He's asking for people to give their opinions on it. So we're going to spend this week intellectually making the case just to abolish all hate speech laws. And we'll make that as a submission, and no doubt we'll summarise it next Saturday. So that's intellectually what we're going to be working on this week. We've got a really good stunt lined up. I'm not going to tell you when or where, but we are going to be on the border, so-called, and it's going to be a very exciting and a very positive stunt. That's coming up very shortly. And thirdly, we are going to have to do something about the abomination of the plaque which they are intending to put up on the Henry Dundas statue. As you know, we are great fans of Henry Dundas, but they have written a new plaque which is going to go up, which is an absolute outrage, okay? And at the moment they've got plastic signs up in Melville Square saying what the plaque is going to say, and oh my goodness me, it's just ridiculous. And I did some research into this, and it was written by, okay, the plaque was written by the leader of the council in Edinburgh and his deputy, and some guy who claims to be Britain's first black historian, who's called Sir somebody or other. And so the 3 of them wrote this, and there's nothing historical about what they've written. It's just a political diatribe, and politically and historically it's entirely wrong. And I have to ask myself, how on earth do we have a situation where leaders of the Glasgow City Council, Edinburgh City Council and his deputy are getting to write historical plaques and stick them up as if they have a clue about what they're talking about? They don't have a clue. The leader of Edinburgh Council and the deputy of Edinburgh Council, they don't have a clue about history, but they're sticking up this plaque. And I'm not even going to read it to you because it's so wrong that I wouldn't even want to put the words out of my mouth. But literally, how is it that in Scotland you get elected to high public office in inverse proportion to your intelligence? And that seems to be happening in all these council areas and in Holyrood. You get elected there in inverse proportion to your ability. It's not like a meritocracy in Scotland, it's like a thickocracy. The thicker you are, the further you're going to go in public sector politics. So it seems. Maybe I'm misjudging them. But if what's written on this plaque is anything to go by, the people who wrote that have no clue about history. And not only that, but it's a really nasty piece of work that's been put up there. And we're going to make sure lots of people know that, because we've got a stunt that we're going to be doing there as well. But we're keeping that under wraps. But that's coming as well. So we're doing a lot. We're doing a lot. And it's like, you know, the song, I hear people talking bad about the way they have to live here in this country. Harping on the things we do, griping about the way things ought to be. Well, I don't mind them switching sides and standing up for things that they believe in. But when they're running down our countryman, they're walking on the fighting side of me. By Merle Haggard. And that's so true. It's just there's people who just want to run things down. They just absolutely want to run things down and run the country down. And it makes them feel better because they do not have a grounded moral sense of themselves. So they hitch onto things which they believe make them a better person. You know, whether this was the case in the old days when people were more religious, I don't know. But certainly today, people grab things in order, and they hitch themselves to wagons in order to feel morally righteous, when in fact it's the furthest thing they could be doing if they want to be morally righteous. And there's a, you know, I don't want to get into American politics too much, but Donald Trump gave a very good speech at Mount Rushmore on the 4th of July, which was really a cultural speech, which is why we liked it. And he spoke, or at least the person who wrote his speech summarised this so well, and it's entirely true here in the United Kingdom. Quote, against every law of society and nature, our children are taught in school to hate their own country and to believe that the men and women who built it were not heroes but were villains. And that's what we see with the Dundas Monument. The radical view of American history, or we could say British history, is a web of lies. All perspective is removed. Okay, we see that with the Dundas statue. No attempt to place him in his time. Every virtue is obscured. We see that with the Dundas Monument. It was Dundas who won the case which established that slavery was illegal in Scotland. But the idiots who have written this plaque don't even touch on that. Every motive is twisted. So if you did something good, they'll pretend it was for a bad reason. Every fact is distorted, and oh my goodness, we see that. And every flaw is magnified, and that's so true with Dundas, because he did get impeached towards the end of his career, and they're going to put that on the monument as well. As if the monument was erected to commemorate the first man in the United Kingdom who was impeached, you know. And he continues, until the history is purged and the record is disfigured beyond all recognition. And that's so true, so true. And he, very eloquent speech where he went on to really to talk up good things, And he said about America, and we could say this sort of thing about the United Kingdom. He spoke about America. He said, we gave the world the poetry of Walt Whitman, the stories of Mark Twain, the songs of Irving Berlin, the voice of Ella Fitzgerald, the style of Frank Sinatra, the comedy of Bob Hope, the power of the Saturn rocket, the toughness of the Ford, and the awesome might of the American aircraft carriers. And he continued on in that vein, and I thought, do you know what, I'm gonna plagiarize that, if you don't mind, and I'm going to write something like that for the United Kingdom, because I love the way that he's really just talking up the good, talking up the positive, which is the way that when you're faced with evil, you have to do. You have to talk up the good, and the good will ultimately triumph over those who are trying to bring us all down. And I attempted this last year. I gave a speech down in London, which has yet to be published. 25 men and women who have created, maintained and sustained the British Union. From Pythias of Massalia to ginger spice. And that was, in a force for good's quirky style, as you can imagine, a really good tour de force. And I said 25, but it was actually 100 men and women that I've identified, going right back to Pythias of Massalia, who gave us the name Britain back in BC anyway. BC. So, and in that I talk about somebody, for example, Thomas Cook, who died on this day. Now, Thomas Cook, and I'm afraid to say his tourist company has apparently not done very well. It's gone out of business, I believe. But he died on this day, on the 18th of July, 1892. And I identify him as somebody who helped to create, or at least maintain the British Union, because it was he who established tourism to Scotland. He was the first person to do package holidays for the English to come to Scotland. In other words, to help the rest of the UK know about other parts of the United Kingdom, to get a sense of their country. And he did this immediately after Queen Victoria, who again was a great unifier, because it was she who began to publicise Scottishness in the public mind. After her first visit here with Prince Albert in 1842. And as a consequence of Thomas Cook's package holidays, visitors flooded into Scotland, and they began to actually understand all about the United Kingdom. So Thomas Cook, for example, is one of these people who connected us socially, and he gets a mention in in the 100 men and women who created, maintained, and sustained the British Union. We could actually turn that into a book if we had the time to do so. But these are almost like founding fathers and founding mothers of our great British Union. What else on this day? No, before I talk about that, Thomas Cook, Victoria popularised Scotland in the public mind. Thomas Cook popularised Scotland in the public mind. Paul McCartney publicised Scotland in the public mind with his song Mull of Kintyre. I mean, that was a great British song. And I was reading about that last year, and he was reported as saying that he didn't know how people would react to an Englishman singing the praises of Scotland. Well, he needn't have worried. He needn't have worried, because it had been done before. And in fact, I think I mentioned this before, the Sky Boat song, Over the Sea to Sky, that was written by an Englishman. And that's one of the popular Scottish folk songs. So that's all our cultural union. English people creating songs for Scotland, bringing people to Scotland, so on and so forth. And the SNP say, oh, that would still continue. No, it will not continue in the way that it's done ever since the Union. It would be a very strained way of continuing. Also on this day, the Secret Ballot Act was passed in 1872. Because previously voting had been oral. You had to say who you were voting for. With this act, it was a cross on a box. On the 19th, the SAS won a victory in 1972 during the Dhofar Rebellion in Oman, and that's particularly notable for the bravery of Staff Sergeant Taliasi Alabalaba, who was from Fiji, and he made the SAS were surrounded, and there's just a tiny number of them, surrounded by around 300 of the rebels from the Popular Front for the Liberation of the Occupied Arabian Gulf. And Talabasi made a run for a 25-pounder artillery piece, which he single-handedly used to fire a shell every minute into the advancing guerrillas, directing them away from the area where the SAS men were. We'll write about that tomorrow. And he was actually chosen in BBC Radio 4's 60 New Elizabethans in celebration of Queen Elizabeth's Diamond Jubilee in 2012, which was probably how we heard about him in the first place. On the 21st of July, Robert Burns died. Robert Burns, great British Unionist. Be Britain still, to Britain true, among ourselves united, for never but by British hands shall British wrongs be righted. And he died, and he was buried in St Michael's Churchyard in Dumfries, and he was given full military honours, and he was clothed in the uniform of the Royal Dumfries Volunteers, with whom he had served and with whom he had written that poem, Be Britain still, to Britain true. And let us not, like snarling curs in wrangling, be divided. On the 22nd of July, it's Prince George's birthday, God willing, a king of the United Kingdom. On the 22nd of July, another significant date in the British year, which we found and recorded and publicised. It was on that day, on the 22nd of July, 1706, that the Articles of Union negotiations ended successfully. They had been conducted at something called the Cockpit in Court, which was a theatre in London, and they were presented to Queen Anne the following day. And as we know, on the 1st of May 1707, the Great British Union came into being, and a nation was created whose name was to become great. 23rd of July, Jenny Geddes, a street vendor, threw a chair at a preacher in St Giles Cathedral back in 1637, and some people say that kicked off the British Civil Wars, which continued until 1651. And it's an interesting period of time when religion was politics, and before they had Twitter to shout and scream at each other. On the 23rd of July in 2014, the British Wealth That We Have in Common Games, or the British Commonwealth Games, began in Glasgow, and we were concerned at the time that Alex Salmond would use the British Wealth That We Have in Common Games to promote separatism, because of course the referendum was that September, and thankfully he was unable to, because there was a strong sense of Britishness was coming out of it. There were 71 competitors, 4 home nations, 3 crown dependencies, 19 of the 14 British overseas territories, and 55 other countries which were or were descended from countries of the former British Empire. And we pointed out at the time that the Queen was head of state of half of those 71 countries, and a third of them flew the Union Jack in some form or another. So the Scottish nationalists also were not allowed to take in their yes flags or anything like that, and they were screeching blue murder when they were getting sent away from the door, because the socially inept, many Scottish nationalists, so they think they can come to your dinner party and like wave their yes flag in your face, that kind of thing. They're socially inept, so they went into some of these games trying to carry their yes on it, which of course was a political symbol which you weren't allowed to do, and they would get turned away, and thankfully they got turned away all the time, and they really had a miserable games, basically, the Scottish nationalists. They were really upset by the whole thing. They thought it was going to be a chance for them to exploit it for them, but what they realised is that the British wealth that we have in common was too strong, baby, for them, and so they very much just came out second place there. That was won by England, Australia and Canada respectively in second and third, and Scotland did quite well. We came fourth. On the 24th of July, the Menin Gate Memorial to the Missing was unveiled in 1927. And as Neil Oliver has said, the names are not missing, but the bodies were missing. The bodies couldn't necessarily be properly identified, because when somebody died, they took the dog tag away. So they had the name of the person, but then they forgot whose body it was attached to. And so ever since then, soldiers carry 2 dog tags, one to take away in the event of them dying and one to continue to identify the body. And a bugler has played the last post there since 1928 every night at 8 o'clock, and that continues still to this day. So we do love our British history because the past informs the present, which creates the future. Stephen saying, with the SNP playing down another referendum to wear on the side, what's the point of anyone voting for them if all they're going to do is speak about a referendum and talk about the virus? That's so true. Folks, please check out our wee-book for the Union. This is a 2nd edition now. The 1st edition sold out within 72 hours. The 2nd edition, it's just the same with a couple of minor little textual differences. But do check it out, and please buy it. It's only £5, and that includes post and packaging. If you are wanting some copies from abroad, then please send us a message and we will work out how much it would cost to send it to Australia or whatever. We've already sent several copies to Australia and a copy to Germany as well. And if you want to buy 2 of them, buy one for yourself and buy one for a friend, or buy one for your MP or your MSP and send it to him or her. Because we want to get this into the hands of opinion formers as well. And lots of good ideas in there. And it ends with our 23 policies to strengthen our union. And we're thinking about policies all the time, and we're pushing these every day. And also check out our shop at aforceforgood.uk/shop. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching. It just remains for me to say, God bless the United Kingdom, and God save the Queen.